How are you? So glad you're here.
Hi everybody, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Great to meet you, I'm Alex. Thank you for coming to Flyleaf today for this event. Your support means everything to us, your book sales mean everything to us, so thank you for supporting us and allowing us to keep having awesome events like this, and for supporting Miles. This evening, we have the pleasure of hearing from Miles Wolff about his recent book, There's a Bulldozer on Home Plate, a 50-year journey in minor league baseball. Miles Wolff is the former owner of the Durham Bulls, the Quebec Capitals, the Burlington Royals, and 10 other minor league, independent, and summer collegiate teams. He is the former publisher and owner of Baseball America, and Total Baseball named him among the top 100 individuals in the history of baseball. He lives in Durham, North Carolina. We hope that you enjoy the event. Thank you again, and remember, actually this one we sold out of books, so thank you for buying books. And if you didn't get your hands on a copy, then you can email us or tell Miles, and we'll find you one. All right, thank you. Turn it over to you.
Alice, is this camera supposed to be pointed?
Oh, I can fix it.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for coming. It's great to be here. I'll do a little reading and then a little intro, and if people have questions, be happy to answer them. We said it's a book, There's a Bulldozer on Home Plate, and let me just read a couple pages here. The chapter's entitled Durham. Durham was ready. For years it has been the blue-collar vertex of the Raleigh-Durham-Chapel Hill Triangle. Raleigh was the state capital with government jobs in North Carolina State University. Chapel Hill had the University of North Carolina and prided itself on being the southern part of heaven. Durham had American Tobacco and Liggett and Myers tobacco factories, along with textile mills and minimum wage workers. Duke University was part of Durham, but barely. It isolated itself on the western edge of the city and rarely interacted with the town. By 1980, folks were turning away from Chesterfield and Lucky Strikes, and the two huge tobacco factories in downtown Durham, which had at one point been running 3 shifts a day, had barely enough business for 1 shift. The cavernous tobacco auction warehouses near the ballpark were mostly shuttered, and almost all of the textile business had moved to Mexico. The city could have become like many northeastern Rust Belt cities, dying but hanging on with little hope for the future. But there was energy in Durham. Citizens knew that Raleigh and Chapel Hill turned up their noses at the poor relation, but civic leaders believed Durham had something special. The mix of people was real. A Black entrepreneurial tradition fostered by North Carolina Central University had been part of the city for decades. Now Duke graduates were not leaving the city after graduation, but staying and starting businesses. The sons and daughters of tobacco workers were also staying in the city and looking for better opportunities. City government was progressive and encouraged new businesses in the community. Durham needed a spark to ignite this energy. By 2020, Durham was recognized as one of the top mid-sized cities in the United States. No one element or incident caused this growth from a dying tobacco town to a major city. A combination of efforts and individuals helped the city transform itself. But many would argue that the Durham Bulls were the first spark that set off this growth. It was not instantaneous, and in the first few years, the flames that the Bulls were building could have died, but the success of the franchise spurred other businesses. By the end of the decade, the Bulls were a national phenomenon, helping to push a city that was markedly changing and growing. Arriving in Durham in the fall of 1979, I had no visions of what Durham could become. My goal was simply to survive. With 10 years of experience in the business, I knew what I could do as an operator. With a city the size of Durham, then 100,000, I believed the team could average around 1,000 fans a game, which would be enough to break even. I now had the franchise, the working agreement with the Atlanta Braves, and a lease with the city on the ballpark. The one thing I didn't have was money. Business schools teach that to start a small business, an entrepreneur needs to have sufficient capital before signing leases and making agreements. Fortunately, no one asked to see financial statements. I did have enough money to pay the league $2,417, the price of the franchise. No further investigation was done on my financial background. At this point, the league was just happy to have a warm body take over the club. The conventional wisdom within the Carolina League was that I was buying the right to lose money, and the league directors silently hoped the franchise could make it to the end of the season. I did understand that enough money was needed to get to opening day, and I started efforts to raise capital. At first, my efforts were directed to finding local investors. Local ownership can be very important in the success of a club, but Durham businessmen had owned prior teams, and no one in the city seemed willing to invest in another minor league venture. It was then that I started approaching family and friends. Two friends and former minor league owners, Van Schley and Joe Hellier, each put in $5,000. Van suggested that a friend of his on the West Coast, Tom Mount, might be interested. Tom was a producer for Universal Pictures and a Durham native. I made contact, and Tom also was willing to put in $5,000. By the end, I had a little over $30,000 to set up and run the Durham Bulls Baseball Club. That should be enough to start the business. Optimism is always great to have. I had never owned a business before and knew nothing about corporations. I was a history major, which was not coming in handy. I needed a legal entity to operate within. With no lawyer, Tom Mount, the new investor, suggested I go see his father, who was an attorney. Checking around town, I found that Lillard Mount was one of the leading lawyers in Durham. I knew that I would not be able to afford him, but Tom kept insisting I go meet with him. I made an appointment and went to see Mr. Mount. He was in his 60s, graying, pipe smoking, and thoughtful, and he listened as I told him what I planned to do with the Bulls. He asked if I wanted a C Corp, a sub-S corporation, or a partnership. I paused and told him I needed to think about it. Another meeting was arranged. I quickly found a bookstore and purchased a Cliff Notes on business. I had no idea what Mr. Mount was talking about, and I was clear I needed some basic knowledge. Returning for the next meeting, I was a bit more informed, and the relationship with Mr. Mount became one of the most valuable contacts I would have in the coming years. His advice on legal and other subjects helped in so many ways, and he was truly a counselor. In later years, when I had to deal with various lawyers, none were the equal of Mr. Mount. I had been worried about legal fees, and Mr. Mount proposed an annual retainer of $600 a year. That seemed reasonable. He became the team lawyer. Later, I would find out that his yearly retainer for the Bulls was nearly the same as some attorneys' hourly fee. Over the years, I would spend many hours with Mr. Mount, but the retainer never changed. That winter, Tom Mount came to Durham to meet his parents, to visit his parents, and stop by the ballpark to view his investment. Tom was very personable, and he was excited about the potential of the Bulls. As a young man, he had attended many games. He proposed that one of the costume designers at Universal Pictures, Marilyn Vance, could design the uniforms, and suggested that artists at MCA Records might be able to design the logo. We had made no headway specifically on uniforms or logos, and her answer was a quick yes. Then in a thoughtful mood, he proposed an idea that I had never considered. Miles, someday we should make a movie here. Wouldn't that be good? I nodded yes, but silently wondered if that wasn't just Hollywood talking. Movies aren't made in minor league ballparks. So that's a section on Durham. Let me get a sip of water if I could. First off, the title, there's a bulldozer on home plate. It comes when I was commissioner of a league called the Can-Am League, and it happened in Nashua, New Hampshire. And Dan Mushan, who's here, was our league president. He called me one day to say, we've got problems in Nashua, there's a bulldozer on home plate. I said, what are you talking about? He said, the mayor has parked a bulldozer on home plate. The owner hasn't paid his lease, and it's an election year, and she wants a little publicity, and so she's parked it on home plate. So the owner didn't have the money. I had talked to the mayor and told her that we would get her the money, but at that point wasn't the right time, but she didn't relent. So we had to, fortunately it was the end of August, we had only a week to go in the season, so we played the rest of the games on the road, but that was sort of the basis for the title. And that also, without getting too much inside baseball, the Can-Am League and other leagues I ran were independent leagues. That means they were there without major league affiliation. And if you don't have major league affiliation, you have to pay the players, you have to pay the workman's comp, spring training. It's probably cost you $500,000 more to run a club without a major league working agreement. And you ask, why would anybody want to do that? Because you run out of money, as the national owner showed, is very possible to do. But that was the one thing I really wanted to do in baseball, was run an independent league. I had run the Bulls, which were affiliated with the Atlanta Braves, great to work with. Burlington, I'd worked with both Cleveland and the Royals. But I always felt I was cheating my fans. When you have a club with a major league working agreement, their goal, the big league's goal, is to get players to the big leagues. And they'll come to town and say, we're not here to win, we're here to develop players, which is real nice, but fans don't want to really see the second baseman learn how to turn a double play. They want to see him win. And I always would compare it to, if Dean Smith or Mike Krzyzewski or Roy Williams ever said, I'm not here to win at Carolina or Duke, I just want to get players to the NBA. Well, that wouldn't be a very attractive product. What makes ACC basketball so great is everybody wants to win. And at the minor league level, as I say, I felt at times I was cheating my fans. So that was my impulse after I sold the Bull, was to start an independent league. And the league I started, was in the upper Midwest. Places like Sioux City, Iowa, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, places I'd never been to. But at that point, I was publisher of Baseball America, and we would get phone calls from fans saying, how do we get baseball in our city? And really, without a major league working agreement, there was no way to get baseball. And these calls were forwarded to me, and I'd just be honest with them, unless you can find a major league affiliate that's willing to go there, and there were no leagues in the upper Midwest. But within a space of maybe 2 months, I had a call from Sioux Falls, I had a call from Duluth, I had a call from Thunder Bay, Ontario. I didn't know where Thunder Bay was, so I'm talking to this guy on the phone, getting out my atlas. Who is this guy and where is the town? And it was, pretty good size, north of Duluth. And so I started going out to the upper Midwest and found cities that really wanted baseball. And so in 1993, we started the first modern independent league, the Northern League. And it was successful beyond our wildest imagination. In St. Paul, they had the St. Paul Saints, Mike Veck, whose father was Bill Veck, that put a midget at bat in for the St. Louis Browns. But that's, again, another story. But so we got these cities, and it went well. People would always ask, well, how are you going to get players without the big leagues sending them to you? Because you have a minor league club. You don't do anything with players. The Atlanta Braves would send me 25 guys to Durham, and they were usually good, and that was great. But we found out there was just this pent-up demand from the players' side that wanted to play baseball. We'd hold a tryout camp, and 300 kids would show up wanting to play. And these are players who had played major college baseball. These were good players. We had former major leaguers calling us. That first year we had Dennis Oil Can Boyd, Pedro Guerrero, Leon Bull Durham. There was this pent-up demand. So we had that first year great players, and it just, as I say, it worked. So, from after I sold the Bulls from '93 until COVID, I was basically running independent leagues, some in the upper Midwest, the Northern League, which became the American Association, the Can-Am League, a league called the Central League, but it was a great run. So that sort of was the impetus to write the book, because independent baseball had been so interesting to me. I thought I'll do a history of independent baseball, but because I was so involved, it ended up being a memoir. So I'll stop now and see if anybody has any questions or any thoughts or comments. Claire, I primed Claire with my daughter. So.
Okay, I have a question. So, as an entrepreneur, you do a lot of creative things and have creative ideas, and a lot of those things were successful. But can you talk about an example of something that didn't go as well, or a promotion that failed, or something that didn't really work out?
Perhaps I can. No, when I was in Savannah, was my first city, and it was a great city that I loved to death. And in Savannah, we always had a great opening day. And it was packed with 5,000 or 8,000 people. And so it went really well. But the second day of our season was normally the worst day of the year, because everybody had come opening day and nobody came the second day. So in Savannah, my third year there, I said, okay, we're going to do something different. We're going to have a great second day also. And I scheduled a doubleheader there to make it special. And the idea was, between games of the doubleheader, we'd shoot off a great fireworks display. The great fireworks display was within my budget of $700, but we advertised it as great. So everything was set. I got all the licenses. It was, it was going to be really good. So I think we started the first game at 6 o'clock. As I mentioned, I think I had everything planned. The one thing I didn't have planned was that the first game of the doubleheader would go 23 innings. It was the fans had expected fireworks about 8 or 9 o'clock. It didn't happen. About 11. I went to the umpires and said, look, could we delay the game and let me shoot the fireworks off? And they said, no, we got to play it through. At midnight, I called the league president to see, can we do something? Because I had gone to the fireworks people, it was a fire department, and said, can we crate them up and shoot them some other time? No, they're uncrated, they're volatile, you've got to shoot them off tonight. So I didn't have a lot of options, so I went to the league president, and the only thing he would say, well, you won't have to play the second game with a double header. Which I thought, well, that's very nice of you. So finally, at 1:30 in the morning, the game ended. Savannah lost after all that time with by 10-4. Columbus, Georgia scored 6 runs in the top of the 23rd. So then we started shooting fireworks off. The only people left were sort of the town drunks who'd been drinking for 8 hours. And they started singing the Star Spangled Banner when they saw the fireworks going off. And they were good. It was a good display. Unfortunately, it was very loud. And this is a Saturday. Now it's Sunday morning. And as soon as the fireworks ended, I went to my office to close up the ballpark, and there were 6 policemen there ready to arrest me. Apparently, you couldn't get into the police switchboard because people thought the town was being attacked. The assistant city manager, who had been in World War II, his wife woke him up, and he listened. He said, "Oh, they're too far away. They're not going to hit us." And he went back inside. So I convinced the police that I had the licenses. This was an unfortunate occurrence that I hadn't expected to go 23 innings. About the only good thing was I got a letter a couple days later from an older lady who lived near the ballpark, and she'd been saving a bottle of gin for a special occasion. And she went out on her front porch and drank the gin as the fireworks went off, and she said it was one of the best nights she'd had. So,
yeah.
Anybody got anything else? Yeah, Barbara.
So when you started the Northern League, you hadn't done any market research in terms of choosing where the locations would be or anything? You just kind of did it by the seat of your pants?
Yeah.
And when you started the subsequent leagues, did you do more research, or was each of them by the seat of your pants?
I'd been in the business for, by then, 20 years. I had a gut feel, one, you got to have population. So I needed cities over 100,000, which cuts out a lot of cities. I needed cities with ballparks. And not many cities had ballparks. If they didn't have a minor league team, they'd maybe torn it down. But, just the enthusiasm was there. And I would go to a city and ask them to spend money to fix up the ballpark on a league that didn't exist, on a type of baseball that didn't exist. So it was a tough sales pitch, but we did it. In Sioux City, Iowa, they didn't have a ballpark, but the mayor really wanted a team, and he said, if you can get 5 other cities, I'll be your 6th, and I'll build you a new ballpark. Well, I had to really scramble. I had 4 cities. I forced Rochester, Minnesota, which wasn't quite big enough. Where's Ricky May? Ricky May in the back, who had been in Bulls GM. I sent him to Thunder Bay, Ontario. Ricky has this deep Southern accent, and people in Thunder Bay sometimes didn't understand him, but they thought he must know what he's talking about. So Ricky got us Thunder Bay. But in Sioux City, it was September, and they had to start building because the winters aren't good. But I went to a city council meeting, and lots of opposition, but the mayor pushed it through. He told me privately, not publicly. He said, not a dime for the arts, millions for baseball. He transferred money from his art budget into the baseball part. So just everything came together. But no, it was just, if you give me a town with a population and a ballpark, I believe I can make it. And that's notwithstanding, Ottawa, Ontario, where I lost millions. Where they had a great ballpark, have 1 million people, everything looked perfect, and it was my final run at baseball. So, yeah.
My grandfather played professional baseball around 1910, and the minor league team he played for was owned by a company. It was like a company team. Mm-hmm. Was that ever part of your model?
No. North Carolina used to have great textile league teams that were owned by the mills.
That's right.
And throughout the country, there were sections that had companies that did their own ballparks or ball teams. But no, we always were looking for investors. But it was tough that first year because, again, we were selling something that didn't exist, or hadn't, before. And again, not get too much inside baseball, but before Branch Rickey, all clubs were independent. Branch Rickey figured out a farm system was the most efficient way to develop players. So in the 1920s, 30s, he did that, and other major league teams followed suit. Oh, it's a better way to get players. And so by the 1950s, if you didn't have a major league working agreement, you were going to go out of business. But yeah, there were company teams that did very, very well.
What started your interest in baseball? Did you play baseball when you were a kid and studying history?
No, I got cut from Little League for 3 straight years. So I didn't play. I loved the game, so I figured, okay, if I can't, I'm obviously not going to be a major league player. So if I can't be a major league player, maybe I can own a team or run a team. I don't think I understood the concept of owning or running, But I grew up in Greensboro and would go to the Greensboro Patriot, Greensboro Yankee games.
Tell them about Holy Trinity and getting the tickets.
Well, one of the impulses, and that's my sister, so at our church, one of my catechism class as a gift, they gave a book of tickets to all the graduates. Well, that's because the guy needed people in the stands, and he figured if he gave away some tickets. But that got me going. Okay. But yeah, no, it was just, I liked it so much, and one reason I went to Johns Hopkins was the Orioles were there, and every spring I would walk to their farm department and say, you got any jobs? Fortunately, they didn't, because I was able to get my degree and everything. I would have quit school and, gone to work in Gastonia or some other.
How old were you when you started this process?
I started running clubs when I was 27, because it was Vietnam, and I spent 3 years in the Navy during Vietnam. To avoid going to Vietnam, I spent a year in graduate school. Because Lyndon Johnson told me the light was at the end of the tunnel, and who was I to doubt our president? So I thought that Vietnam would be over, but that wasn't over. So I joined the Navy, and then started knocking on doors. And one of the good things was lots of colleges now have sports administration programs where they teach young people, the basics of getting into sports. Well, when I was getting in, there were no sports administration programs and no young people looking to get into baseball. So my first job was as a AA GM, which today might take you 10 years to get there. But no young people were applying, and the Atlanta Braves had success with young people. So I think I was the only young person to apply for the Savannah job, and I got it. But yeah. Yeah.
I was fortunate to visit Quebec City in the game there, and so the language issues, at least there in that part of Canada. How did that work out? You had to have translators in their head for. They had loudspeakers, one in English, one in French. How was that experience?
Well, one of the great experiences, I've been to some good towns, was running the team in Quebec City, Canada. They hadn't had a team for 30 years. And I got, again, like the Northern League, I got some calls from people in Quebec, how do we get baseball here? And I went up there the first time, the ballpark was such awful shape. I said, no way. 6 months later, they called me and said, come back. We fixed it up. And there was interest. And fortunately, my wife, Michelle, speaks French because Quebec is almost exclusively French. And I am awful in languages. But no, we had 2 ball players in the Northern League who were from Quebec French speaking. So I hired them to come be in the front office and then play in the summer. And what had happened, the Quebec Nordiques had just failed, the hockey team. And there were a lot of good sports professionals that were out of a job, and running baseball and running hockey is really similar in terms of marketing, and because you have a lot of games. You know, if you have a football team, you only have 1 game every 2 weeks, but baseball and hockey, you have a lot of games. So, you know, Quebec was ready, but we did it all in French. When I had the Ottawa club, I had to have a PA announcer do it in both English and French. I had to have a French and English play-by-play guys. You had to do it, but in French. But in Quebec, it was just pure French. And we would sign every good. There's some good baseball played on the amateur level in Quebec. It has a good history. So there were always some good athletes out of the Quebec who had been drafted by major league clubs and played. And we would sign them. So some years we would have 7 or 8 Quebecois players on our team. One year we had Eric Gagne, who had been the Cy Young Award winner with the Los Angeles Dodgers. But there's this pride in Quebec of your province. So he came and played with us for a year, and it was tremendous. But, you know, you've been to Quebec, and what a great city. Yeah.
They also had good baseball food.
Yeah, any more questions? Yeah.
So, what was the history when you came to Durham? That history behind that ballpark you first started with, it was in bad shape, too.
Yeah. The old Durham Athletic Park had been built in 1939. The first ballpark was there from 1926 on, but it burned down in 1939, and they immediately rebuilt a steel and concrete ballpark. So it had been an original member of the Carolina League, great attendance in the 40s, early 50s, but went downhill, had a sort of rebirth in the early 60s when the Astros came with Rusty Staub and Joe Morgan and some great players. But by 1970, the team became the Raleigh-Durham triangles, half the games here, half in Raleigh. It didn't work. It failed. So baseball hadn't been in Durham for 10 years or 8 years when I came to town, and the ballpark was in awful shape. And the city had actually tried to tear it down, but the property had been given by the Hill family with a codicil that it has to be used for recreation purposes. So the city was ready to put some money back in to make it playable. The lights were awful. They'd had rodeos out there, so the field was awful. But the city spent enough money to make it playable. And again, timing is right, and Durham was ready to adopt something. And it was, I think, independent newspaper said, it was the one place where town and gown came together, where the Dukies would come, you know, the tobacco workers. And it was Durham was celebrating itself. So, you know, timing is perfect, and Durham wanted to show something. And then when Raleigh wanted a team after they saw Durham doing so well, it made Durham even more prideful because we blocked it. As, you know, in the book it'll go into how we did it, but yeah, but it just the city was ready, and you know there weren't enough bathrooms, there weren't enough concession stands. It was built for 1939, but for 1980, so every year we'd add restrooms, add concession stands. It never was adequate, but it was a great ballpark.
You probably tell the story in the book, so if you don't want to answer this question, just have it read it. That's fine. But I'd love to hear what led to the famous movie. What was the connection that made that happen?
Well, as I mentioned, the little part I read, Tom Mountain said someday we'll make a movie.
Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking, come off it. You know, who is this guy? But you want to make a movie, and I think it was 6 years later, Ron Shelton, who was here for a book signing about a month ago, Ron Shelton, a screenwriter, came to Tom and had this script. And it had been turned down other places. But Tom liked the script. He sent Ron to Durham. He didn't say the movie has to be done in Durham, North Carolina. He said, go there, get some atmosphere, see what you think. Ron was a former minor league player and fell in love with the town. And, you know, Bull Durham was just the working title. They never, you know, if you think Bull Durham doesn't say anything, it's just, but it was the old smoking tobacco. And they kept it, and we were sure the movie was going to be awful. Because the movie folks did things differently than minor league folks. So we get a crowd for them, and then they decided, well, we want a night shoot. I mean, there were conflicts. But at the end of the day, Michelle and I went to the premiere at the Carolina Theater, and tuxedos and all of that, and we weren't quite sure. You know, you're nervous, you know, because the early scene, you know, some extracurricular activities. But about 2 weeks later, it was in the Lakewood Shopping Center Theater. So we went there to see it without pressure and just loved it. So, yeah, but I mean, Bull Durham, we were doing very, very well. We didn't need Bull Durham, but it pushed us over the top, which made us need a new ballpark because you couldn't keep up with the crowds after the movie. And we had a referendum for a new ballpark, which we lost, which for me, this was my livelihood. And so within a week, I had an agreement with Jim Goodman of Capital Broadcasting to buy it. He was going to put the team out toward the airport off of Page Road, had a plot of land, because he believed it should be a regional team. But the city all of a sudden woke up and said, we're about to lose the Bulls. So they got a way to fund a new ballpark. And I think that was the best thing that ever happened to the Bulls, was the sale to Jim Goodman, because he had the finances to do American Tobacco. Yeah, I mean, and for me, it enabled me to do my independent leagues, which was the best thing for me, and for the city of Durham, you know, to have Jim Goodman and doing all this development. You just see downtown Durham today, and it's nothing like 40 years ago. So.
One more question. Did you ever imagine doing a women's league?
No. They did one at the park. At one point, there was a women's baseball league down there. Lasted maybe 2 years. It was after the new ballpark, so the old ballpark was going to be for the women's league, but it just didn't work.
Didn't you hire a woman player?
Well, Isle of Borders we had in St. Paul. I didn't. Mike Beck hired her, and she could pitch. I mean, so it was, it was a positive thing for the league to have her pitch. Is our time up?
Yeah. What do you see as the future of independent baseball?
I think it'll be around. But it's so much financially more expensive. So right now there are about 40 independent clubs in 4 leagues across the country. I don't see it being any more than that, but the cities that have it are some really good cities, so I see it surviving. But it's a very expensive proposition these days. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thanks again.
Just wonderful.